Hey, thanks for watching this tutorial on using Fusion Cheater. If this is the first one that you're seeing, I recommend you go back and watch one of the previous tutorials. But for those of you who are already a little bit familiar with it, this tutorial is going to focus on how to use some of the export tools. One of the big advantages and one of the reasons why a lot of people want to have multiple sizes of a design is because they want to do something with all the different sizes, right? So we've got a few options in here. One is to create G-code for all sizes, create Fusion 360 design for all sizes, and then export local file for all sizes. So I'm just going to touch on the options in a couple of these, and I'll actually go through one of them. So for export local file for all sizes, this is just something that's been updated recently uh, in terms of how you can do the naming and also kind of the scope. So let's go through each one of these options. So the types, you could say you want to have a step file and an F3D or an STL or an IGES or whatever 3D kind of neutral formats you want. For the naming option, this is something that people have said to me they've asked for a lot, which was either the document name, the description, top level. Again, remember this is going to be of the root design, so it would be of the bookshelf itself, the description or part number, or custom. And this custom column can get a little tricky, but you just have to remember that this is going to just be based on the name of the column in Google Sheets. So if you had defined a special column here called my file name, you could give it some value here and you could use that as the name. It could get a little tricky. You just have to make sure that the custom column has to be present on the parameters and features sheets, and the name is case sensitive. So just make sure you name that correctly if you're going to do it. But otherwise, probably a lot easier. Use description or part number. One file per size. So for this case, we have one Fusion 360 design with many components in it. This would be, say, we're going to export step files. I'm going to say I want one step file per size, which means per row in the sheet, right? So one file for each of these rows, but it's just going to be a step file of the entire design. The other option is to say all components per size. In this case, you're going to get a lot of files, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to create a step file for each one of these components individually for each size. So you would get the top and you would get each of the parts all in a directory, and you end up with instead of one step file for each of the rows in the sheet, you'd end up with one directory for each row in the sheet with each part in the directory. This is the other option here, which is for the component file name. You can either have it be the component name itself, so right side, the description, or the part number. Be careful with description. A lot of people use things like, if you look at the descriptions of these parts, something like bookshelf, comma, shelf, and that comma might be kind of a problem. But part number, component name, whatever. So then you can have an individual step file for each part, for each design, for each size. And those are the basic options for exporting. The other option is generating G-code. So again, this assumes that you have the cam is all set up, everything's dialed in, you have the right post processor set up. You know what I mean? This takes quite a bit of tuning to make sure you have everything set up. But in this case, you would say, do you want to post by setup, folder, or operation? So if you had at the setup level or at the folder level or at the operation level, and then you can select if you want setups, then you can come in here. There's one setup in here. If I picked folders, I could pick which folder. There's none. And if I picked operations, I could pick individual operations, or you can even do multiple. And then the key here is to make sure that you you can set the output folder, but the key is to make sure that you select a post processor that is local on your computer and that you have access to in the standard Fusion 360 post processors folder. And then the final option is to create a Fusion 360 design for each size. And again, similar options for the naming. And then this little option here, a lot of times you'll end up with this master v14 would get written to the name. Sometimes people actually want that because they're trying to preserve a separate instance for each version, but for the most part, I would assume you don't want that. So I unchecked by default. But let's say we wanted to do part number, and we will create now an independent Fusion 360 design for each size. And let's go ahead and do that because this will be important for the next video as well. Okay, so once that process is finished, if you look in the data panel, you'll see that now you have an individual Fusion 360 file for each size. And one thing that's really important to note here is that when you open up any one of these, they're all still linked back to the original Google Sheet. So when you look at the sheet, if you edit this row now, this is still tied to that specific model. And when it opens, it can still rebuild itself and it knows that it's tied to this size large. So if you open the -3, it is still reading its parameters here. So if you make a change here, it will still update. And I'll go into a little bit more depth on that in another video. All right, thank you guys for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and look forward to talking to you in another upcoming tutorial video. Thank you.